Where's my national championship team? Some fans are disappointed after watching the Michigan-Fresno State game, but we see it differently. Coming up next. Welcome to the Point a Minute Show, where we make one outstanding point for every minute of video. My name is Cliff. His name is Mac. Let's get into it. The reigning national champions, the Michigan Wolverines, played Fresno State on Saturday, and it wasn't really what we expected to see. We thought we were going to see an Ohio State-level blowout of a lesser team. Instead, Fresno State put up a fight, and Michigan, even though they had the lead the entire game, really didn't shine until the fourth quarter. In the end, they did win 30-10, and normally we would consider that pretty close to a blowout, but a lot of fans are upset, while a lot of rival fans are having a good laugh over it. Mac, you've looked at the stats. What happened to Michigan?
Yeah, I think a few different things were going on here. I think Michigan was maybe trying a few things out that maybe they shouldn't have been against a team of Fresno State's caliber. Maybe they underestimated Fresno State a little bit, but they are a pretty good group of five team. So I think a few things were going on here. So first, Michigan was making a ton of rotations on defense. Will Johnson was getting subbed out quite a bit. At one point, the broadcast was concerned that Will Johnson was actually injured because he was subbed out for a couple of plays. So I'm thinking that with all of that rotation that was going on, players were having trouble getting their footing. That might have had something to do with it. I've heard that Wink Martindale was actually trying to see, what he had personnel-wise before Texas. So he might have just been trying to do a little bit of planning. I really hope that's the case. And in fact, I'm actually inclined to believe that that's the case. Otherwise, I think Michigan would have had an even better defensive showing. And Michigan's defensive showing, I think, was pretty stellar anyway. I mean, they held Fresno State to their fewest points since 2019, I think it was. But I'll get to that in a little bit here. Secondly, I think the running game just couldn't get going. I do think Kalel Mullings, though, made a serious case for taking that RB1 spot. And obviously that sucks for Donovan Edwards. But if you remember, Michigan couldn't really get anything going in the running game in the non-conference last year either. This year, it did feel a tad bit different just because when they couldn't get something going in the running game, it felt like Davis Warden couldn't really throw the ball to get them out of bad situations to convert well enough on third down. At least J.J. McCarthy could. But that's also not to say that Michigan can't throw the ball. Davis Warren did actually have a 60% completion percentage. I just think that it was actually the play calling that did it. So the play calling didn't put Michigan in a position to actually convert. You saw on a lot of third and longs, Michigan was throwing towards the sidelines, throwing screens and all that. That's not going to pick up a first down unless there's some seriously good blocking out on the sides. But Fresno State had their number every single time they did those plays. That was kind of interesting. I'm not sure what the rationale was behind that. But either way, I think that's what happened. It was a combination of vanilla play calling, shaking off some rust, and some weird coaching decisions with rotations and all that.
All right, you put some stats together on your Twitter feed about Fresno State. So let's go through that, and you can explain why you think Fresno is actually a pretty good team.
Yeah, so through this thread, I kind of explained how, we were talking about the Fresno State game reminded us a lot of what happened against Bowling Green last year. I started thinking about it a little bit more, and it actually reminds me a little bit more of what happened against Maryland. So if you remember that game, so the defense against Fresno State this year, they were as advertised. If you remember against Maryland last year, though, Michigan's defense allowed 247 yards, and that was coming after they had already established a 157-yard average per game. So that was a big deal from Maryland. And if we go to the next tweet, I'll explain a little bit further. So we were talking about some of the quarterback issues. In 2023, J.J. McCarthy threw for 52% completion percentage and 141 yards with an interception. Davis Warren against Fresno State actually threw for 60% completion percentage, 118 yards. It's a few less, obviously. That's because they were trying to attack the sides of the field. They weren't really going downfield very much. But he did have the touchdown throw to Colston Loveland. So against Fresno State, Davis Warren actually kind of had the better game. If we go to the next one, we'll talk about rushing. So versus Maryland in 2023, Blake Corum had 28 carries for 94 yards. That's a 3.4 yards per carry average. 2 touchdowns, though both of those touchdowns only came from less than 3 yards out. At least he got him, though. That's pretty good. Against Fresno State, though, Kalel Mullings, again, potential running back 1 here. He had 15 carries for 92 yards. That's a 6.1 average, or 6.1 yards per carry average. That's pretty good. Those are some chunk plays right there. That's definitely good news. From a yardage standpoint, Mullings actually had the better game. No, he didn't score any touchdowns, but he was helping Michigan hold on to the ball for longer. And speaking of rushing, we'll go to the next tweet. So talking more about rushing, Maryland only had 7 yards rushing on 33 carries against Michigan's defense in 2023. That's 0.5 yards per carry. Fresno State, very similar stat line. Yes, fewer carries. That's because they erred on the side of throwing the ball around the field, but a very similar stat line nonetheless. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. You're probably like, okay, but Maryland is obviously much better than Fresno State, to which I say, not so fast. In 2023, if we go to the next tweet, in 2023, Fresno State finished 9-4 versus the 65th ranked strength of schedule. In 2023, Maryland finished 8-5 versus the 95th ranked schedule. So Fresno State had a better record against a strength of schedule that was 30 places better than Maryland. Building on that now, if we go to the next tweet, Fresno State in 2023 ranked 45th in scoring, 20th in passing, 35th in passing defense. Quarterback Mikey Keene threw for 3,000 yards and 24 touchdowns, and then their running back ran for 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. Now, if you go to the next tweet, I'll explain why that's important. In 2024, Fresno State returned basically all of that experience. They had 8 returning starters on offense, and then a ton of returning experience on their, quote, outstanding defensive line, that's according to Lindy's, and in the secondary, which was considered a strength for Fresno State in 2023. Now, what's my point? My point is that Fresno State had a better record versus a more difficult schedule than Maryland and returned a ton of that experience. And because of that, they are this year Mountain West contenders thanks to their lines, which are considered some of the best in the nation, and their skill positions. And on top of that, I mentioned this earlier, Michigan allowed them their fewest points scored since San Diego State in 2019. So when I said that Michigan may have underestimated Fresno State, this is why. Fresno State has a very good football team. They've never really been that much of a slouch when it comes to group of 5 teams, but this particular year, they could have a chance to make the final 12-team playoff. They could get that group of 5 bid. So yeah, Fresno State is actually a much better team than we thought.
I was going to say, and that'll be the proof in the pudding too. If Fresno State wins out or has an excellent season, that will only look that much better for Michigan when they're picking the playoff teams, right?
Right. Yeah.
So let's ask the big question then. What does this mean for Michigan versus Texas this coming weekend?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's going to be tough for sure. And obviously thinking about it right now, you're kind of like, man, I don't see how Michigan has a shot. And that might be because of what Michigan showed us. Maybe that was intentional. And that's kind of been my point here, is that Michigan intentionally didn't show us a lot of what they're capable of. So I'm going to err on the side of optimism here. Sharon Moore did say that Davis Warren won the quarterback position and that nobody actually lost it. So it wasn't that one quarterback was just less bad than the other quarterback. Davis Warren had the better completion percentage coming out of fall camp than Alex Orji did. Mm-hmm. So that's good. He won the position rather than losing it. We saw the O-line struggle in the first 3 quarters against Fresno State. That happens when you have a new O-line that you're trying to get to gel. But once we got to the 4th quarter, they had that 4th quarter touchdown drive, and that looked like vintage Michigan football. That was a great 4th quarter drive. We do know that the defense is going to be good. That much is basically a given at this point. I think most of the reason Fresno State threw the ball as well as they did was due to the fact that they're just that good of an offense. Furthermore, I talked about this before, Michigan was rotating players a lot on defense. Like Will Johnson was not on the field for, plays at a time. So I wonder if maybe that kept some of the Michigan defense from really getting a footing, and that's because they were trying to see what types of player combinations they had available for Texas. Maybe Wink was trying to understand his defensive packages by in terms of his personnel a little bit better. I don't know. I'm just thinking that Fresno State has a really good offense, and Michigan was clearly rotating their players a lot. Thirdly, my final point here, Texas feels pretty one-dimensional right now. And I'm not saying that to be a slight against Texas. I think that they could have a very good running game if they use it. And against Colorado State, they really didn't use it. They do have injuries in the running back room. They lost, I believe it was their first and second string running back. Don't quote me on that, but they did have injuries in the running back room. They still have a really good running back in Gibson. But the fact of the matter is that he had 10 carries for 67 yards and a touchdown. Now that's 6.7 yards per carry. That's some good chunks. But Texas put up 545 yards of total offense in this game. And not a ton of that came on the ground. Quinn Ewers went 20 for 27 for 260 yards and 3 touchdowns. That says to me that they were erring on the side of throwing the ball around the field. They didn't use the pass to open up the run game like a lot of people think that they'll do against Michigan. To me, if they were going to use the pass to open up the run game, it would have been against Colorado State, because then they would have been able to keep their playbook closed. But they didn't do that. They aired it out. Now, maybe they were running the same passing play every down. I don't know. I don't think that's the case. But you also just look at their scoring drives. They didn't have a single scoring drive of over 3.5 minutes until you get to the third quarter. All of one scoring drive was under 2 minutes in the first half. Then you get to the third quarter and they've got a 3.5 minute scoring drive, and then another minute and 41 second scoring drive. And then in the fourth quarter, they had a 4-minute, 41-second scoring drive. So they're moving fast, which again is indicative of a offense that is throwing the ball around the field and doing it basically at will. I don't think that they kept their playbook closed in terms of passing offense. I think that they just need to throw the ball around right now because maybe that's all they can do. And if that's all they can do against Michigan, then Michigan, theoretically, the defensive playbook should be fairly straightforward. Get pressure on Quinn Ewers, force some turnovers, force some bad throws, make them go 3 and out, get them on 3rd and long, and then get them off the field and let Michigan's offense hold on to the ball for as long as they possibly can. If Michigan can do that, Michigan can win.
One other thing I wanted to ask you was about Donovan Edwards. Mm-hmm. We didn't see Donovan Edwards do a lot of the breakout plays. He got stopped short quite a bit. Do you think has Donovan Edwards taken a step back, or is Donovan Edwards being sort of reserved for the bigger games? Is he kind of the Babe Ruth player that he's either going to break an 80-yard run or he's just going to do a 3-yard run and not get those middle ground runs? What do you think's going on with him?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it feels. I think there's 2 ways you can look at this. You can say either Michigan was closing the playbook and Fresno State knew that all Michigan was going to do was run, and so Fresno State stacked the box, which is absolutely what happened. Fresno State stacked the box and got a ton of pressure on the line. Michigan wasn't able to establish much of a run game. They weren't able to do that in the non-conference last year because most teams were erring on the side of stopping Michigan's run game because they didn't think J.J. McCarthy could throw it. This season, though, I think that's partially, that could be the case, but there's also the fact that Donovan Edwards kind of is that Babe Ruth all or nothing sort of player. He's someone, he said at one point that he wanted to be the best back in Michigan history. That's a lot of pressure to put on yourself. And what I think has happened is he's the type of player who waits way too long for holes to develop, and because he doesn't want to go for 3, 4, 5 yard chunk plays. He wants to go for the touchdown on every single run, and I love that ambition for sure, but I think he needs to understand that 5 yards, that's a good run. If you need to get physical, then get physical. Kalel Mullings is doing that, and it's not like I think Donovan Edwards is a wuss or anything and just doesn't want to get hit or isn't physical. I think that he's just psychologically not quite there yet. So if he can convince himself that it's okay to, maybe run into the blocks and let the blocks carry you for 5 yards or something like that, then I think he'll do a lot better. But right now he's kind of an all or nothing back.
That's what we think. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe, do all the things. If you want more great analysis on college football, check out all the shows right here on Michigan Football at the Voice of College Football. You can also catch Mac and I live Monday nights at 8 p.m. on the Big Ten Team Rivalry Show right here on YouTube. Mac, take us out.
This is Michigan Football at the Voice of College Football.